So first invited speaker is Professor Neeleman. Who's professor in linguistics at University College London. Sometimes in London, yes. So the topic will be, I suppose, on morphology, and it's related to his specialities. It's like post-theoretical syntax, but grammatical dependencies, I'm very interested in, so myself, syntax phonology and semantic interface, and morphology and word formation. So welcome to Professor Ed Neeleman.
Let's start, I guess. Today I want to talk about the relation between generative syntax and typological frequency. And as you might imagine, there's a kind of tension between those two areas of inquiry. Generative syntax is a digital theory in that it says that some things are good and some things are bad, and that's it. Typological frequency is a much more analog measure, where some things are preferred and some things seem to be dispreferred, and those two things don't seem to match very well. And various people have worried about that connection, given that on the one hand there's evidence for the generative approach, and on the other hand we have this massive typological evidence. What to do about that? Well, there's a bunch of work that suggests that although generative syntax has no direct influence on typological frequency, it has an indirect influence in that some grammars are easier to acquire than other grammars. And as a consequence of that, typological frequency is reduced for those grammars that are harder to acquire. So the idea is, yes, we can have a digital theory, a theory like generative grammar. We can capture the typological data by assuming that some of the grammars that are possible, that are permitted, are harder to acquire. I'm going to try to see if that can work for one very intensely studied typological domain known as universal 20. Here it is, at least in its original formulation. It's a universal about the order of demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and noun in the noun phrase. And it essentially says that there is a linear asymmetry between orders of these elements before the noun, where only ever one order is found, demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and orders after the noun, where there's variation. So in this case, you find both demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and adjective, numeral, demonstrative. Okay, that's the rough generalization. Now, of course, there are not four orders for logically possible orders for 4 elements. There are 24. And after immense and very impressive work by Cinque, we roughly know what orders are attested and what orders are not attested. They're given in this table here. I need you to memorize this before we continue with the rest of the talk, of course. But you can see some orders are grayed out and some, not sure that's an improvement. There we go. Will I talk about this slide in the meantime? In the interest of time. Right, so these are the 24 logically possible orders that you can get in the noun phrase. And as you can see from the shaded orders are orders that Cinque argues are not attested at all. There are 10 of the 24 logically possible orders, so only 14 orders are attested. So the first question we need to answer is why only those 14 orders? So 10 out of the 24 logically possible orders are not attested, 14 are attested, and the question is what explains the difference between those two orders? Well, we kind of know that pretty well by now. What you need to get this pattern is really 2 sets of assumptions. One set of assumptions has to do with the basic structure in the noun phrase, and it says that the noun first combines with adjectives, then with numerals, and then demonstratives. And then in the resulting representation, the linearization of sister nodes can vary. That's what is depicted here. So the noun combines with the adjective, then the numeral, then the demonstrative. And the dotted lines are meant to indicate that some languages choose to place the demonstrative to the left, some to the right. From the numeral to the left, some to the right, and the same for the adjective. If you have difficulty picturing this or are not used to this way of thinking, this is a very helpful toy model of how syntactic trees work. Okay? That gives you that simple system of having a constant hierarchy and flipping things around in different languages, gives you 8 orders, the ones that are circled here in red. And those orders come in symmetric pairs because this mirroring system gives you symmetry. That's not enough to get everything. We need to make a few other assumptions. The other assumptions are that there can be movement in the noun phrase as well. The movement is very tightly restricted. Only the noun or constituents containing the noun can be moved. And that kind of movement must always be to the left, as depicted here. So the noun can move, that's the blue movement, or maybe the noun and the adjective, and it can move over the numeral or the demonstrative. Those are the options. Languages, again, choose one of those. So in some languages, there's no movement at all. Let's say English. In others, there might be some movement. Others are more enthusiastic still. That gives you all the remaining orders, ones that are circled here. Notice that for those orders, since the movement must always be to the left, there is no mirrored acceptable order or attested order. So all the ones in all the mirror images of these orders in column 4 are grayed out. Okay? That's the basic system. We have a symmetric tree, but the movement is asymmetric. And this gives us the full set of data. I can't discuss why you can't get the data that you can't get, but believe me, you can't get them. Okay. All right, now the question is why we face here a little bit of a mystery. Why should it be that the movement must be leftward? Why is the movement system asymmetric and the phrase structure system symmetric? And I'd like to argue that that's not actually the result of syntactic theory. That is something that has to do with parsing difficulties, processing difficulties that result from rightward movement. The leftward movement causes some parsing work, but rightward movement is particularly complicated for the parser. I can't present, for time reasons, that argument in detail. It's written up if you want to read it, but the gist of it is as follows. Rightward movement of material that's obligatory can be shown to be particularly difficult in parsing. And there's a bunch of experimental evidence supporting that that comes from heavy MP shift in English. Heavy MP shift in English causes difficulties in parsing whenever the object is obligatory. When the object is optional, the parsing goes quite easily. When it's obligatory, there are severe parsing difficulties. All severe. Of course, we can do it. You can see slowdowns in various places in the reading times. Okay, so that's for heavy MP shift. Now the noun is of course obligatory in the noun phrase, so that's an obligatory element. And therefore rightward movement of the noun also cause difficulties in parsing. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2 is this picture that has to do with how languages are acquired. It has been known for a very long time that if you want to have a serious model of language acquisition, you must assume that the child parses its input, because it's very hard to learn a grammar from unparsed strings. You'll need to have some idea of what's what in the tree, what's the subject, what's the object, and so on, to get anywhere in constructing a grammar. So the input, what the child hears, has to go through a parser to give you what is called the intake, the stuff that is parsed, which is then used for language acquisition. LAD stands for language acquisition device, whatever that may be. A bit of the brain. Okay, that's the general picture. Now, you can see that this picture implies, and this is an argument that Kirby made last century already, that if something is hard to parse, therefore its frequency in the intake will be reduced, right? And you can build a model of language acquisition that goes to various generations that has the effect that such a reduction from input to intake can have the consequence that certain grammars are filtered out. Even though UG allows them, they will never survive because they have this parsing difficulty in acquisition. Okay, that's what Kirby argued, and that's what would explain why we don't have rightward movement orders in the noun phrase. Those rightward movement orders are hard to parse, therefore they're reduced in the intake. That means that they will be reduced in frequency, in this case, reduced to 0. Okay? Okay, some people nod, which I assume means that it's not completely incomplete. All right. Okay, now, so far I've done the digital thing, right? As we generative syntacticians are wont to do. I've shown you that some things don't exist and some things do exist, and that we have a theory of how that works. But really, what we want to get to is not just that, but also what's on the white, what's projected now. The frequency of orders in the noun phrase is actually very skewed. And it follows this kind of power law, as you can see. Some frequencies very, very frequent, and some frequencies very infrequent. So I can't read the numbers myself, but this is 630, and that is 20 all the way at the end. So there are quite big differences. And the question is, how can we model those? Well, we're going to play exactly the same game as we played before with the parser and other factors in acquisition suppressing certain grammars, favoring other grammars. I'm going to assume that in general, everybody needs to assume something like that. There is some form of linguistic entropy that disperses languages across the space of possible languages. And then in addition, there are these suppressing factors which reduce certain grammars. And these suppressing factors are of different strength. We've seen one, which is the ban on rightward movement that results from parsing. This hand here is supposed to point to the point of no attestation. That factor is so strong that it reduces the attestation of those orders that you would get from rightward movement to 0. And then there's a bunch of other factors, and I've given them there: harmony, N before A, and no movement, that also reduce typological frequency, but not to 0. The rest of the talk is basically organized like this. I'll show you what those factors are. I'll show you what the predictions are, and then we look at the actual frequency of these. Okay, and miraculously, they will match. Okay, so harmony. Harmony is defined here. It's a pretty straightforward notion. Essentially, if you don't think about movement structures, harmony essentially says we like all the modifiers on the same side of the noun, either everything to the left or everything to the right. Right? It's as simple as that. There's tons of evidence that harmony is favored in language acquisition and also in typological frequency. There's one twist, however, in the way I've defined it, namely, the definition implies that all movement structures are automatically disharmonic. The reason for that might be a little bit hard to grasp initially, but if you look at the tree and C, that's a movement structure. There is one element, that's the demonstrative, that sits on the left branch. But then there's another category to which that more bloppy hand points, this one here. And given evidence that in noun movement structures, the noun projects, that category sits on the right branch. And so as a consequence, if you didn't follow that, it's not important really. But as a consequence of the technology of the movement and the definition of harmony, every movement structure is also a disharmonic structure. Okay, that's the take-home message. The second preference is the N before A preference. Again, there's a lot of typological evidence that that is a factor. The explanation for it has to do with the fact that a lot of adjectives cannot be interpreted unless you know what the noun is. So you're probably aware that a big butterfly is not the same kind of big as a big elephant. Right? Those sizes are not the same, and that's actually true of many, many adjectives. A red brick is not the same as a red bus, it's not the same color as a red bus. So the semanticists assume for many adjectives, in order to interpret the adjective, you need to refer to the noun. That is easy in noun order. If you parse noun adjective order, you start with the noun and then you get the adjective. So interpretation of the adjective is easy. You have all the information already available to you and you're processing the sentence. In adjective noun order, well, you have the adjective. Now you need the noun information. You need to go back to the adjective, interpret the adjective. That's a more complicated process in parsing, and that's thereby disfavored. That's the second factor. And the final factor is a desire not to have movement. If you're outside the generative paradigm, you're probably already thinking movement is very complicated and why do we need it? And that's indeed the reason why movement is disfavored in parsing. It requires a lot of work. If a category is moved, we need to identify what has moved. We need to store it in short-term memory, and then we need to offload that relevant information in the right position. This is known to be a costly procedure in processing. Therefore, that is also something that will be making acquisition harder. Okay? So now, let's move to what this all predicts. So this table has the predictions and the, I'll talk you through this, how this table is put together. First factor, as I mentioned, is the harmony factor. And harmony favors two orders over all other orders. Why is that? Well, those are the two orders where either everything follows the noun or everything precedes the noun. Those are harmonic orders. And all the other orders are either orders where some elements precede and some elements follow without movement, or they're movement orders. As I've argued, all movement orders are disharmonic as well. That means that other than those two basic orders, everything else is disharmonic. That's the first step. So that makes a cut between the top two languages there and everything else. Then within each of these groups, the harmonic group and the disharmonic group, we can apply the noun before adjective criterion. Right? Noun before adjective is favored over adjective before noun. So within the first two languages, first they're both harmonic. The second order, the English order, violates the noun before adjective requirement. Therefore, that's ranked lower than the harmonic order where the adjective follows the noun. And then we can do the same in the group of the disharmonic languages. There's a bunch here at the bottom. Have the adjective before the noun, and they're at the bottom because that is a further depressing factor. Okay. And then finally, within each of these groups that we've now built, well, not in each of these groups, in the disharmonic groups, in the three disharmonic groups, we can apply the no movement constraint. Right? We want, look at, wish I could point. The orders in that third block and in the fourth block, those are the same for harmony and N before A, but they differ in terms of the no movement constraint. The no movement constraint orders are demoted, are predicted to be less frequent. The same is true for these two blocks. These are both harmonic and they violate the n before a requirement. But the last order here is also a movement order, so that's demoted with regard to the rest. What we get out of this system is a predicted ranking with, what is it, 6 groups. Is it clear how this is derived? Okay, so now the question is, what's the truth about the orders? And that's actually a more difficult question than how to get the theory right. Because there is quite a lot of ways of counting frequencies. So this is, I hope you can see this, a lot of data on one sheet, but didn't know how to do it otherwise. So here are all the orders. All the way at the right is the predicted ranking of the orders. Right, and then these orders are put together. These are claims to the data, right? These are claims about what is actually more and less frequent in any in the languages of the world. There are different kind of measures, and you might have different preferences for one measure over the other. So the measure that Cinque gives is, I think it's fair to say, based on a bit more syntactic analysis than the orders that Dreyer gives. On the other hand, the order that Dreyer gives here is the order that is balanced for all kinds of areal and genetic relations between languages. Which one of these measures we should go with? Oh, the other thing I should say is that Cinque corpus has way more languages than the Dreyer corpus. That might argue in favor of the Cinque corpus, but whatever we take, we will have to, this is the best data that we have at the moment. As you can see, there is a pretty good match between the predicted ranking and the any of these rankings that have been proposed in the literature. So in all cases, for all proposed rankings, there's there's a pair of languages that doesn't fit. Those are highlighted in bold. All the other languages follow the predicted ranking. Fortunately, I think, the languages that don't fit are different over the different measures. If all the measures were pointing to the same two languages two orders that didn't fit, I would be quite worried, but that doesn't seem to be the case. One way to bring that out is to take an average ranking. The average ranking is there given as AR, and that agrees completely with the predicted ranking. So I think there's empirical work to be done, perhaps, to figure out what ranking we should really go with. But overall, I think we can say that the ranking is pretty much as predicted. Okay, conclusions. Well, this is just a summary of what I've just said. Syntax is just decides what is grammatical and what isn't. It's digital in that respect. It doesn't have direct impact on typological frequency. However, not all structures are equally easy to acquire. In some cases, I didn't really go into that very much. There might be some innate preference, but in many cases, it has to do with which structure is easier or harder to parse. And typological frequency can be modeled using those factors together with some kind of dispersal that I've called here linguistic entropy, just because that sounds. This example shows that there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about the possibility of connecting linguistic theory with these more squishy data, the typological frequency data. But we can only get there if we accept that this requires cooperation between the theoretical linguists on the one hand and the psycholinguists and typologists on the other hand. And I've put here 2 beer glasses to suggest that it would be good to spend more time in the pub together, discuss some of these ideas. Thank you.
Does
I like to
anybody
the fact
question?
English is processed different tablet since getting appearing
Yeah.
suddenly no point. So I
Quickly,
think we have
we move on. Does anybody have any questions in regards to this?
about 5 minutes.
If we keep it quick.
Oh, thank you. And I will just protest.
Oh, you protest.
I see there you write that collaboration, linguists, psycholinguists, typologists collaborate, etc. And I would say, what about phonetics and prosody?
Oh, well,
And if we come back to phonetics and we look at interdisciplinary, why don't we use common terms? Because in phonetics, we have been talking about constancy and variation. And here you have been talking about word order variability, one of your main points. Now, my question is something to be investigated. Syntax, when we change something, I'm almost sure we will change prosody as well, intonation or something like this. And in that case, like in Greek, a lot of people were talking, oh, word order is free in Greek, but it's not, because it shows focus relations and sometimes turn units or pointing ahead, etc., etc. So syntax does not function by itself, but in combination.
Mhm.
And what would be your guess? I mean to say, your transfers or movements, when you move something, what is the prosodic? And then if we ask native speaker, is it the same meaning or different? So we should try to relate one way or another to semantics. We need more collaboration, but I've enjoyed your talks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, right, there's a lot in that question that I can't say too much about, but two comments. One is the data in this table. These are orders these are the neutral orders in one or more languages. So, and often they're the only order in many of these languages. So in those cases where there's only one order, of course, prosody can be placed in different ways over the same order, but I don't think it's going to be possible to connect prosody directly to these particular orders. The other thing is, well, I'm a syntactician, what do I know? But for these particular data, I think in many cases we will not have the prosodic evidence. So many of these data points come from grammars of the relevant languages, right? People go into dusty libraries and figure out what the orders are. In some cases, the grammars are more reliable, and in some cases, they're less reliable. But in very few cases, do they then also provide prosodies of the given structure. I don't think we can talk about that at the moment. It might be quite relevant, but I don't think we know.
Since we're in France, what would you say about languages where both orders, sorry, thank you. Since we're in France, what about languages where both orders are in principle possible, but with heavy skewing for postpositional adjectives? That presumably fits nicely in your story.
Yeah. So I'm in principle quite happy with those kind of languages because they show this. If we go to, they often provide very direct evidence for this kind of idea that adjectives can sit on either side of the noun, for example, or numerals. There's also languages where the numeral swings around. Demonstratives, I'm not so sure about. Numerals and adjectives, definitely. The problem is not so much that I don't want to talk about those languages, but that I can't talk about those languages. So the way the data have been put together, kind of algorithm for deciding what order to ascribe to a particular language is, well, we first look at, is it the only order? Then is it the neutral order? And then is it the most frequent neutral order? And that procedure always gives one order per language. And so, yes, there are languages. So we know for sure that those orders are neutral orders in the given languages. Might be more than one. I don't think it's problematic, but
I can say something. Yeah, maybe we have a prosodic argument for French.
sorry.
It could
Prosodic
be
argument
a
for
prosodic clear argument to document for a long time. To put the adjective after a determinant numeral and then verse. This is prosodically more efficient.
I see.
But, okay, thank you very much.
Right.